The location of a country's capital city is one of the most important choices for any nation's leaders to make. They contain important government facilities, offices and headquarters, and usually contain the primary residence of the nation's leadership. The best location for a capital city is somewhere that can be easily defended and from where you can exert control and project unity over the rest of the country. Capitals need to be seen as representative of the entire nation and be easily accessible to the largest number of people possible. And for all those reasons, capitals are most often built within the center of a country. For example, in 2005, Myanmar moved their capital city away from Old Yangon, the largest city in the country, towards Naypyidaw, more than 300 kilometers to the north. This was done because Naypyidaw is more centrally located within the country than Yangon was. In a similar manner, Brazil also moved their capital city back in 1960, away from the historical but by then overcrowded Rio de Janeiro on the coast, and towards a deeper and more centralized location within the Brazilian interior that they ended up calling Brasilia. This decision was largely made in order to encourage inland growth away from the coasts and to make the capital city more regionally neutral. Now in the year 2022, there are two very large modern countries who are actively in the process of relocating their capital cities for pretty familiar reasons. Egypt is relocating their capital away from Cairo towards a newer planned city still under construction a bit over to the east, while Indonesia is relocating their capital city away from Jakarta and moving it more than 1,000 kilometers away to a completely different island. This is incredibly significant because Indonesia itself is an incredibly significant country. She has the fourth highest population of any country in the world, lagging only behind China, India and the United States, and boasts more than 270 million people for such a large country. Indonesia is about 17,000 totally separate islands, all scattered apart from each other. However, there is 5 big islands that Indonesia controls: the entire islands of Sumatra, Java and Sulawesi, and half of the big islands of Borneo and New Guinea. 4 of these island territories are fairly sparsely populated, while the thousands of smaller islands add little to the overall population. While the island of Java, which alone is home to more than 60% of the entire Indonesian population, 145 million people, makes Java by far the world's most populated island, with even more people than Russia, a country that is 123 times larger. Jakarta has been a pretty major city for centuries. City's metropolitan population has skyrocketed to a population of around 35 million people, which makes Jakarta the second largest urban area in the entire world after only Tokyo. Jakarta is an enormously important and significant global city, but it is not without problems that make it actually a not so favorable location for Indonesia's capital city in the 21st century. There is a lot of inequality within the country. As Java is home to 60% of Indonesia's population, the island only makes up 7% of Indonesia's land. Ultimately, that means that the remaining 93% of the country's landmass over on the 17,000 other islands are pretty underrepresented, both in terms of population and in economics. While the economy in both Jakarta and Java has been growing tremendously over the past few decades, the other islands have been more or less economically left behind and have remained fairly stagnant. To illustrate to this point, ever since 1971, Java has gained 75 million people, while Sumatra has only gained 38 million. Kalimantan, what the Indonesian side of Borneo is called, only gained 11 million, Sulawesi only about 10 million, while Western New Guinea only gained 4 million. Jakarta itself has a lot of issues to start. The city has experienced a tremendous amount of urban growth in the past few decades. Back in 1945, at the beginning of the Second World War, the city's population was only 600,000. 25 years later, by 1970, the city's population had increased to more than 4 million. And then 50 years later from then, by 2020 it had more than 10.5 million within the boundaries of the city. Jakarta's population is still growing. By 2030 it's projected that there will be more than 40 million people living within the metropolitan area, more than the entire population of Canada, and causing it to surpass even Tokyo to become the world's newest largest city. Massive internal migration from the rest of Indonesia. The city has been experiencing a substantial ecological breakdown accompanied by intensely gridlocked traffic and congestion. Nearly 4.5 million cars and more than 13 million motorcycles are used on the city's streets. While public transportation only accounts for a third of the city's commuters. To exacerbate the pollutants from all these vehicles, there are 7 existing coal-fired power plants and 5 more planned plants, all within a 100-kilometer radius of the city. The emissions from those 5 planned plants alone will eventually be equal to adding 10 million additional cars to Jakarta's already overcrowded streets. Given this, air pollution and smog within the city is a serious issue, and it generally ranks alongside cities like New Delhi and Beijing. The air quality can get so bad here that just last year in 2021, 172 days were considered too unhealthy to be outside, which was more than half of the entire year. But out of all of Jakarta's many problems, it's water that is the most severe, as with many coastal cities across the world. Jakarta is not unique in dealing with the threat of rising sea levels, but Jakarta's specific situation is rather unique because on top of dealing with rising sea levels, the city is simultaneously sinking. Jakarta was established within a swampy environment many centuries ago. 13 rivers flow through the city which used to provide ample fresh water, but now they're all wildly polluted and currently unusable for drinking water. Jakarta does have a series of water pipes, but they only reach about 60% of the population, and they're all highly concentrated in the more wealthy areas of South and Central Jakarta. As for the millions of other people who don't have any excess, ground pumping is basically the only means of obtaining any fresh water for themselves. But of course, as this water beneath the surface is removed, the soil above will continue to compact. Nowadays there are dozens of massive and heavy concrete and steel skyscrapers across the city's surface, adding even more weight and pressure, pushing down onto the fragile soil below. As a result of all these contributing factors, the entirety of Jakarta is now sinking into the ground by about 1 centimeter a year. But there are some areas seeing as much as 25 centimeters of sinkage a year. When you take rising sea levels into consideration, it's easy to see why most of the city will very shortly be in grave danger, and while floods are already a chronic problem that the city faces. According to some estimates, 40% of Jakarta is already sitting beneath sea level, while many others predict that by 2050, only 28 short years from now, the entire city of more than 10.6 million people will be buried beneath the sea. But of course there is a plan to do something about it. In 2014, the Indonesian government revealed the plans for what they called Giant Seawall of Jakarta, expected to be completed by 2025. The plan will eventually construct a titanically sized seawall across the entirety of Jakarta Bay to protect the city from the ocean beyond. The wall is planned to be constructed in the form of a Garuda, a giant legendary bird from the Hindu and Buddhist faiths, that is also the national symbol of Indonesia. The whole structure is intended to be iconic and boost tourism, and it draws heavy inspiration from nearby Singapore Sentosa Island. After the massive bird Garuda is constructed, Jakarta Bay itself is intended to become a water reservoir enclosed inside that will eventually become a vast new source for fresh clean water in the city. Jakarta's 13 rivers that all flow into the bay today are all planned to be cleaned up and cleared of pollution in order to keep their currently polluted outflows from transforming the bay into a stagnant cesspool. Meanwhile, the giant seawall itself is intended to become a new center of Jakarta's urban development, complete with housing, roads and railways that connect back to the mainland, that should all be capable of hosting a new population of 2 million people. The whole project is expected to carry a steep price tag of about $40 billion. The current leader of Indonesia, President Joko Widodo, made a bold announcement in 2019 to move the capital city away from Jakarta for the first time. Things are moving pretty quickly. For one, we know that the new capital will be nearly 1,000 kilometers away from the current-day Jakarta, over on the island of Borneo, which happens to be the third largest island in the world. And it means that Indonesia's capital will be on an island shared with 2 other countries, in the north Malaysia and Brunei. Borneo is largely covered by rainforest and is sparsely populated, but it possesses several advantageous features for Indonesia's new capital city. First, the Indonesian government itself already owns a large part of the land over on their side of the border, making it easy to build a brand new planned capital city compared with Jakarta. Second, the risk of disasters here are rather minimal, whether it be from floods, earthquakes, tsunamis, or especially from volcanoes. Indonesia's geography is dominated by volcanoes, and many of their eruptions in the past across the archipelago have been some of the most destructive disasters in all of human history. Today there are at least 127 active volcanoes across the country, and more than 5 million Indonesians live within their danger zones. But if you notice on this map, there aren't any major active volcanoes on Borneo, which from a risk perspective makes it far safer for the country's capital to be located there than on either Java or Sumatra. And finally, Borneo is geographically located nearly precisely in the center of the entire Indonesian archipelago, and there are several developing city areas nearby the proposed location that stand to grow immensely over time in total. Indonesia hopes to create a new capital territory on Borneo that will cover nearly 1813 square kilometers, slightly larger than the City of London's area and more than twice the size of present-day Jakarta. It is also President Widodo's hope that eventually this new capital will be home to 1.4 million government employees and their families, potentially reaching upwards of a population of 7 million people all in all. With several futuristic designs already picked out for the more important government buildings like the Presidential Palace and more. All that's left is to fund the effort and begin construction. The total estimated price tag for building the new capital here is around $34 billion, but with extensive delays in the project stemming from the COVID-19 pandemic, budget cuts and other mounting pressures President Widodo as he oversees the remainder of his second term as president, since he hopes to begin moving at least some government offices over to Borneo in 2024. He only has 2 short years remaining to accomplish it while he's still in office. And as for Jakarta, even though the city is definitely facing some pretty serious hurdles, over the coming decades Widodo's hope is that encouraging millions of people to leave the city for the new capital over on Borneo will be enough to relieve at least some of the pressure and allow Jakarta precious time to recover and thrive once again.